Hi everyone, my name is Camila and I'm the host for Let's Talk Miami, a place where we are discussing local and national issues so that as a community we can have informed conversations and really engage in our government. And today I have a special guest, Leah Weston from Civic Culture, and some of you may actually know her if you're a New Tropic subscriber like I am. She is the creator of Leah's Guide to the Ballot, which has helped many of us in how we vote and understand what each level of government does. So, Leah, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I meant to ask you how you found me, and you answered that
Yeah.
question.
From the New Tropic, yeah.
Thank you for the new topic to promoting my ballot guide.
Yes, I know that that helped a lot of us in the community understand, especially for the primaries in August, understand what each of those positions actually meant and what was the importance of them. So thank you for that and for what you're doing.
Of course.
And Leah, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit of how you got involved in politics. Tell us about your organization, Civic Culture.
Okay, so how did I get involved in politics? It's going to be like sort of a non-linear story, but it all does connect at the end. Um, in 2006, I had moved back to Miami permanently. I was living in New Orleans, and I was a college student uh, at Tulane, where Hurricane Katrina hit. That if that single event changed my life completely. It it was the first time that I saw for myself what inequality was in our country, and it just got me very inspired to get more involved. And so I ended up moving back to Miami permanently in 2006. Finished up at UM, and when I was a student, I got involved. I actually happened to go on a bike ride. I went on a group bike ride that was put on by this group called Emerge Miami. And Emerge wasn't just organizing a bike ride, they were really trying to introduce people to the city and getting people to see it from a different perspective. And so that was the first time I had ever slowed down out of a car to like just take a look at the conditions of our city on the ground. And that ended up introducing me to local government, who's really, everybody follows the presidential election going on right now. I know that's like at the top of everyone's mind, especially, today when we're recording this, it's just a couple of days after election day. But I really learned a lot about how local government influences your everyday life. And so I became much more familiar with just the role that local government played because of this one particular thing that I was doing, which was riding my bicycle. Um, and so Emerge, Emerge was just this group of people kind of like me who were really just wanted to improve our city, and we all learned a lot together. We organized hundreds of bike rides and other events in the community, got to know a lot of people who were also doing work for a much longer than us. It introduced us to other activists in Miami who had been doing work for a long time. Um, and then and then what happened? Then I uh, decided to go to law school, and I um, I went to law school. I was sort of active in law school. I mean, it's really hard to be active because it's just an incredibly intense
Yeah,
experience.
I bet.
Yeah, but I had a lot of
It's
really interesting legal experiences. Um, I worked in law school for a lot of different things, but my really life-changing experience was interning with the Community Justice Project. And if you haven't heard of them, look them up on Twitter at CJP Miami or Google's Community Justice Project Miami. They're they're a really interesting law firm slash organization. They provide legal support to grassroots organizations. So that experience taught me a lot about who the grassroots organizing is on the ground here. It also taught me a lot about local government because um, we worked on this at the time. It was when Uber was just coming into Miami, and so uh, CJP represents a group of taxi drivers, and so you just started to learn about who the stakeholders are in all of these big issues that everyone's talking about. And so I did that and I graduated and I started practicing law. My first job was as a postgraduate fellow at I was a lawyer in the health rights clinic. I represented veterans. And mostly it was veterans who were fighting with the government over their benefits. Although there were a lot of other things that I did as well. So that really got me exposed to government and bureaucracy. And at the same time that I was doing that, I got really, really involved in 2015 in a campaign for my city commissioner. The person who had been in the commission was termed out. He was running. He wasn't running, but his wife was. And then the other person, the other top person who was running was an activist named Grace Solaris. Everybody thought that these two people were going to duke it out for the win. And then this dark horse candidate named Ken Russell came on the scene. And I met Ken on a bike ride.
Bike ride seems to be a theme here.
Yeah. I met Ken on a bike ride. We got to know each other a little bit. And on an amazing fluke, he ends up winning the election. This was in 2015. And on New Year's Eve in 2015, I got a phone call and he asked, would you like to come work for me? And so I took like a giant left turn in my career. I left practicing law and I decided to go work for a city commissioner at the city of Miami. And I did that. I worked at City Hall for 3 years. I met a ton of people. I learned a tremendous amount about local government. And so that was really when I started to realize how much knowledge was missing among most people. So that's and so how did I get to civic culture? I left that job at City Hall last year, and I ended up launching my own consulting firm doing public policy consulting. I've done research and written white papers for a bunch of different organizations. We can talk about some of my work projects if you'd like, but I also decided that I was going to launch a newsletter that would be free to explore some of my personal research interests and maybe to talk about some of the things that I was working on as well. And that became a platform for a voter guide that I started doing in 2018 when there were 12 constitutional amendments on the ballot, state constitutional amendments. And I had learned how to research constitutional amendments because of a project that I did in law school. I took this class on public policy where we were asked to get into groups and do like a real life simulation type of policy research project for an organization. And so my group did some research for an organization called Equality Florida on how to put together, this was before same-sex marriage was legalized through the courts. Equality Florida was considering its options for how it could legalize same-sex marriage across the country. And one of their strategies was to try to see, could they get a state constitutional amendment? So I had learned about how you research these things and all the rules around it. And people were asking me all these questions. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to write a guide and send it to like 100 people. And it was very, very popular. And so I decided, okay, well, seems like there's a need here. I'm gonna do one again. And
yeah, especially around one of the things that really caught my attention about your guides were that it wasn't just focused on the commissioners or the mayor, but you actually delve into the amendments, referendums, even circuit judges. So that's usually something that people don't vote because they really have no idea. And so I think that that's great that you provide that insight.
yeah, the people are really confused by it because the language is confusing. For example, in the state constitutional amendments, the actual amendment like that is going to get written, or if you vote yes, the actual text of the amendment is not on your ballot.
Yep.
It's just a 75-word description. And having, been in rooms where we were trying to figure out how can we get something into 75 words, it's actually really, really hard.
Yeah.
So yeah, I learned how to kind of decode these things and explain them to people. And some of them are just, that was the year where there were two competing solar amendments, and one of them was extremely deceptive, and people really don't like that. So Yeah, the judicial the judicial races are actually the most popular part of the guide because no one else is doing it. Literally nobody.
I think it's just you and discourse.net have been
Yeah,
the only two sources that at least I've been able to use on our content. So yeah,
and
it's definitely
discourse.net is actually one of my law professors.
oh,
So yeah, and his analysis is pretty good too. Like we differed on our conclusions, but his analysis is excellent.
yeah. No, and I appreciate it. And so I want to ask you, why did you pick civic culture? Like, why that name?
Well, so I was trying to come up with a name for my consulting business, and I knew I wanted it to involve civic something. Um, and then when I put those two words just kind of came to me together, and I really thought about this idea of creating a culture around civics because people say, oh, this is boring. But if you create a culture of people who are engaged and interested in what's happening, even if they don't understand all of the technical details, I think people underestimate how much they really can understand.
Yeah,
And like you could see this seriously in local government because the people who are running your local government, they're just people. They're people in your neighborhood. They're people like, you might have a degree of separation from. They're not that special. Um,
and
they're just
they're not famous either.
No, no, they're not. I mean, some of them end up getting a national reputation,
Right.
and being well known, but for the most part, they're just regular people. And so between that and the very sad state of our local news, and that this is everywhere,
Yeah.
people are just not getting information.
No. Yeah, and that's sort of the reason behind the creation of Let's Talk Miami. It was just that frustration of I can't find what are the issues and what's going on. Why are these elections even important? We're just here about the presidency, but I went through our own experience with local government, and I was shocked at the fact that no one was reporting on these things that were really affecting residents here on their day to day. So I completely get it.
They used the Miami Herald, like when it was doing well, used to report on this much more.
Yeah.
They used to go to, I mean, not every city, but there was somebody on the beat in Hialeah. Which is a huge city, by the way. It's like the second largest city in Miami-Dade County. And just the effect that social media has had on local news. Um,
Yeah, it's
it's
it's sad.
Yeah.
But the reality is that we're not getting this information because it is underfunded, and and this kind of reporting requires a lot of time and
It
research.
really does. It does. It's very and institutional knowledge.
Yeah,
One of the problems with the economic changes in the news business is that smaller newspapers like the Miami Herald have become stopping off points for journalists who are really good, and then they get hired away to, the New York Times or the Washington Post, or one of these other big national papers. And the journalists who have been in Miami for a long time and know, it's because it's not just knowing like what's on the page. It's not just reading a law. It's understanding who the people are and the relationships and the ecosystem. And every time a reporter who's been doing something for a couple of years in Miami leaves, all of that knowledge is gone.
right. Yeah, and like so that's one part of the fact that people aren't able to engage as well. But my question to you is, for you, when you're thinking of civic culture, what do you think of?
Um, well, I think of people showing up to their commission meetings. Like, for example, I think so. COVID has changed the way that we've done a lot of things, but one of the positives is I really hope that remote participation in commission meetings doesn't go away.
Right.
Eventually, we all need to be meeting in person, and there is no replacement for people showing up in person. There just isn't. But the upside of being able to access our meetings online is that many new people are participating and seeing their government for the first time, and looking and oftentimes in horror, like, this is how our decisions are made, this is the way that the public is treated. um So that's one aspect I think of civic culture. Another is just our focus is on elections right now, but all the rest of the hard work happens between elections.
Yep.
You know, recruiting good candidates, understanding the issues, making sure that your elected officials know how you feel about something, because they're influenced only by the people who show up or only the people that are talking to them regularly. It's just a human thing. You're going to respond to the thing that's right in front of you. So just really adding more voices to the mix.
Yeah, and I hear that about having people participate in commission meetings, but I do empathize with the people because they've made it pretty difficult for residents to participate. I've even tried when I was working to go, and it would be at 5 o'clock. That's when the meeting would start, and I would work, and by the time I would get there, it was already 6, and you already missed probably the ordinance that you actually wanted to hear on. So I agree that I really do hope that they keep the virtual aspect of it, because it opens it up to people that are working, and the reality is we're not going to stop working so that we can engage with the local government. That's just reality. That, but I really do hope that at least we have still that tool where we can just tune in.
I hope so. I think, you know, there's upsides and downsides to it. But really what's been great is that so many other people who don't normally show up have been visible, and the participation needs to continue. It cannot always just be in response to an election or, you know, a shooting that happened or, you know, something that
Outrage.
people need to be, yeah, people need to be following things. And it takes a really long time to make positive change. And so I think that's been good. Uh, just the fact that people have been talking about elections, and like you, for example, in your project, you're creating really very useful educational material on Instagram. I don't think that's the only source that, you
Right.
know, we need to be educating people on. I think one of the things we maybe learned from this election in Miami-Dade County is there's nothing that replaces in-person get out the vote and, you know, voter engagement and canvassing. Um, so digital and traditional are still relevant. And radio is a highly underappreciated medium, especially in Miami. It's where a lot of people are getting their information, and bad information in some cases this year. So so yeah, it is just creating a culture where who represents us is important to us and it means something to us.
Right. And the reason behind me reaching out to you really was that despite all the issues that were presented in this year, really, it felt like 2020 was just like just this big mountain of garbage, to just put it in one way. And it just kept growing and growing. And I was shocked, to be quite honest with you, to see how people really didn't show up. I was looking at just voter turnout, and in the last few days before the polls closed, I started posting like, what does the turnout look like? And at the end of the day, here in the county, we had a 75%, almost a 75% voter turnout. But nationally, we had a 61.2%, and it's projected to reach 66.4%. But that that to me is crazy when you think that there are countries like Australia that have an 80% voter turnout. It, and in this situation where there was a scandal with another scandal, and the pandemic hit everyone, really. It did not discriminate against class, race, ethnicity. And I that's sort of the reason why I reached out to you, because I feel like, what are we doing that people aren't connecting, and being motivated to participate, really?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think first of all, COVID just disrupted everything. And like in some ways, I think it's really hard to measure this year as any kind of baseline for anything. 75% in Miami is actually pretty good. It's less than they were anticipating. They thought it would be 80.
80, yeah.
but it's still pretty good. In fact, just today I was looking back, on Facebook memories, and in 2013 I had posted on this day about a voter turnout in an off-year cycle. So this is, of course, not a big midterm or presidential year, but in 2013, the voter turnout in the city of Miami was 11%. So, and that's typical. That's typical. 15% turnout in a local race on an off year is considered pretty good. So why are people not motivated? People aren't motivated because they don't understand it. And they think, they're all just, they're all just politicians. They're no one's going to represent me. Nothing can make a difference. And it's hard for me to say that I understand where that feeling comes from, because you look at the TV, you turn on the radio, and you turn on Twitter or your social media feed, and it's just like you said, it's a mountain of garbage. It's a mountain of garbage, and like Congress can't seem to get anything done. No one's talking about anything real. I mean, they're up there confirming a Supreme Court justice, and it's just like it's maddening. And so people's response is to not participate.
Right. And so so I think that having your newsletters, and there are many organizations out there that I feel like are starting to get the grasp that people feel disconnected and they don't understand. So there is this huge campaign to inform people. So do you have some resources that maybe our listeners can tune into that that they can use and really get informed?
It takes work to get informed. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, there's no replacement for reading.
Yeah.
Like an Instagram slideshow is good. That's a great starting point.
Yeah, but it's not enough.
But you need to here's a great place to start. Go onto the county's website or to your city's website, at your state house, your state senate, type in your address, find out who represents you. That is step one. That's the least you can do. And it's relatively easy. All you got to do is Google it. There are probably sites that will tell you who all of them are. I just personally like to go to primary sources, as maybe you could see in my voter guide. I link to a lot of primary sources. Primary sources being either the city code itself or state documents, government documents. I subscribe to the Miami Herald. I have my issues with the Miami Herald, but I subscribe to a local newspaper. I read a lot of the local newspapers. I read the New Times. I read the Miami Times, which is Miami's oldest Black newspaper. It's really important to be, consulting, because Miami is, it's diverse, but it's also very segregated. And so there are different media bubbles that are talking about different things. I wish that I could understand Spanish better than I do, because what's going on in Spanish radio and the role of all of that in Miami-Dade is a huge part of the results that we saw.
I was actually reading today, coincidentally, on an article that was talking about how there's a lot of information now to like bust any conspiracy theory out on social media in English, but those conspiracy theories, although Twitter's saying, well, this is erroneous, they're being reincarnated in Spanish, and there's really not any fact checker for that segment. So people are being misinformed in the Hispanic community.
Right. I mean, we don't have a fact checker on WhatsApp. And the problem is it's all relationships, right? If it comes from someone you know and you trust, they'll believe it, which is honestly part of the reason my voter guide is popular, is because whether or not you know me, you got it from someone you know, right?
Right.
Or maybe actually Google did drive quite a lot of traffic, especially to my primary guide. But for the most part, you learned about it because it came through someone you know or someone you trust. And that in a time where there's so many people on social media, there's so many news sources, you're going to go to someone you trust, because it's hard to trust any institution anymore. So that happened. And then, the other thing that happened with El Nuevo Herald, I don't know if you followed this story, where they were publishing an insert called Libre for 9 straight months. Okay. I'll tell you this story because it's kind of unbelievable.
Yeah, please.
I'll preface it by saying El Nuevo Herald is not a very influential newspaper in the Spanish-speaking media world in Miami. However, they still do have circulation. They still have like 15,000 people who get the paper every day. And a reader discovered that a paid insert called Libre. So this is not produced by the Miami Herald. It is a third party, little 40-page magazine that gets included with the El Nuevo Herald every Friday, was filled with racist, anti-Semitic, conspiracy theory craziness. And the Herald was unknowingly publishing this insert for 9 months.
Wow.
9 months. Our newspaper. We don't know how many people. Effectively, it was so there's a genre of I don't even know what to call it. I guess it's like an ad. There are these TV news is more really guilty of doing this. They're like paid things that are designed to look like real news, but they're sponsored.
Okay.
And so this was somebody's third party publication. They entered into a deal with the Miami Herald to circulate it. They paid the Herald to circulate their little insert. And for the most part, it had stuff that was fine in mainstream, whatever. But it had this one columnist who was just producing vile, racist, anti-Semitic garbage. I mean, this, not even a reasonable conservative voice on it. This was far right conspiracy stuff.
Like what kind? What are you talking about? What?
Okay, so Billy Corbin tweeted on September 20th, 2020, that there were, 32 issues of a weekly insert where this one columnist called Michelle Obama a black monster, Africa the ass of the world, George Floyd an ugly common criminal, Black Americans should be grateful for slavery because it brought them to this country. They have contributed nothing to the greatness of America and should decamp to Ghana if they don't like it here. That's just an example. I mean, shockingly, this was not written by our newspaper, but it was published by them.
Yeah, and distributed by them.
And so some people have lost their jobs over this, but how do you undo the damage?
For 9 months.
For 9 months. 9 months since January. So it's hard to quantify what effect this had, but it just goes to show you that this has been going on under the radar, or at least under some people's radars.
Right.
So yeah, like it's really hard to get information you can trust.
Right. So step 1 would be find out who represents you. Step
Right.
2 to subscribe to a local newspaper, not El Nuevo Herald.
Well, maybe subscribe to El Nuevo Herald. I mean, they need subscriptions. They need people demanding
True.
better editorial standards. So I'm not of the like boycott Miami Herald. Okay. I'm all about holding them accountable, but they're still our newspaper, and we got to support what we got. So, and follow local journalists on Twitter.
Do you have any recommendations of like some local journalists?
Definitely. So I would say Doug Hanks he's the Miami-Dade County reporter. He's a great source. Joey Fletchus, he's the City of Miami's reporter. I really like Danny Rivero at WLRN. Yeah. He's great. Samantha Gross at the Miami Herald is pretty good. Alex Harris. Oh, so many. I should make a Twitter list and send it to you.
Yes, please. Just like I know, for example, for the Spanish community, I'm a huge fan of Roberto Tejeda from Actualidad 1040. He always provides both sides of the argument. He always has both sides of the aisle come in and discuss issues. And he's very, he confronts people when they're lying. I love that, which is, I feel like it's something that is missing in a lot of the media. But other than Danny Rivero, I didn't know much of the local journalists. So it helps because these people are already involved. And like you were saying, they have the knowledge of really the context, because I think people forget that the context is so important. People are just consuming all of this content, and if you take it out of context, it just flies right over. It has no importance really. But when you understand the context and the community that you're living in, and how it affects, that's where I feel like you can truly engage people.
Yeah, you really can't look at information without looking at the people involved and the relationships involved. And so, yeah, following local reporters is really important because you're never going to get a perfect perspective on Miami from, just reading a headline about it in a national paper. Except for Patty Mazzei at the New York Times. She worked at the Miami Herald for a long time.
Okay.
She's been writing and she just did a long thread on this about, I can't believe anyone is surprised about the nuance of how the Latino vote split in Miami, because I've been writing about this for months, and it's true. Her coverage has been great. So Patty Mazzei, she's a great journalist. I loved her when she was at the Herald, and now she's at the New York Times, still covering Miami. One of the best.
I've noticed that New York Times has they do cover Miami, which is funny because you would think they were just focused on New York and Washington and the Northeast, but they do have some sections on us.
Well, there's a big New York Miami connection. A lot of people from New York live in Miami, or or people living in New York are connected to Miami. One of my guiding stars throughout the pandemic was my friend from high school, Dr. Susana Behar. She's from Miami, but she's living in New York, and she's been like talking about COVID and following what's going on in Miami with COVID. And also she's provided some really good perspective on, because she's also a Jewish Cuban, which is like a whole other thing. There's all of these subgroups, right? And national media doesn't quite understand the nuance.
Right. I think at the end of the day, there's nothing like having local news, and that's why I support the fact that you're saying that we need to support our local newspapers, because it's really our troops on the ground, in a way of saying it. They're the ones that know what the community looks like and what are the real issues. So if we don't support it, then we can always complain about there's no good news, but if we're not doing anything about it, then it's just gonna keep getting worse. So
I always read local news first in the morning. That's my news routine. Is I always read local news first. If I have time to read national news, I will. But to me, it's more important to know what's going on right outside your door.
Right. And like how you said initially, your day to day is not determined by Washington D.C. or what some national news headline says. It's right here. It's local. It's what's happening to your neighbor, what's happening in City Hall. So I appreciate the fact that you're saying all of this information, and the Twitter on journalists that we can follow. That would be amazing.
Okay, I've been meeting to make a Miami Journos Twitter list. I'll also include some other reporters who aren't in Miami but who follow Florida politics, because it's so important to understand the role of Tallahassee and what happens elsewhere in Florida. And because a lot of the things that happen in Miami that don't make sense are because of what's going on in Tallahassee.
Wow, that's a whole topic to delve in.
For sure. Maybe on a future podcast we can talk about that.
Definitely. I've been learning a lot about Tallahassee, and I'm sometimes like, what?
Yeah.
How is this happening?
And it is like very far away, and that's part of the problem, but it's also culturally completely different. And Miami is like the stepchild.
It literally is. I feel like Tallahassee looks down on us like, what is Miami gonna do now?
They do. They for sure do. And some of that's merited, but not all of it.
Awesome, Leah. It was so great having you, and thank you for all of this information and for everything that you're doing. And I want to add, how can people support your newsletter, your organization?
So my consulting company, I do private consulting work for organizations. If that's something interesting to you, check out my LinkedIn profile. But my newsletter, I haven't really, thought about monetizing it or anything. However, because of Bruce at the Nootropic and some other people who've been advising me to, you know, make a way for people to give back, I have a buy me a coffee link. So at buymeacoffee.com/civic culture, you can buy me a coffee, like $5 at a time. It's pretty low commitment. Some people have bought me, lots of people I know have bought me coffee, which is very nice. Thank you, friends. But a lot of people I don't know have also bought me coffee, which is, to me, that's really, that I love seeing that. I'm like, I have no idea who you are, stranger. Um, so for now, that's the best way. And if there are any topics that you're interested in getting an explanation on about local government, let me know and be happy to, take requests. I have some planned things that I want to write about in the future. For sure, I want to write about what happened with not this year's Amendment 4, but last amendment, the reenfranchisement
Right.
amendment, because I've been deeply involved in what's going on around that this year, and there's many. It's a long and interesting story.
That's a series, really.
It is. There's many chapters to that, and then some other things that have nothing to do with voting. I worked on a budget explainer on how to read a local budget with my friends at Civic Pro, which is a really cool tool. I should plug them because this is a great way. If you really want to get in the weeds, sign up for a free account at Civic Pro and you can track any issue that you care about. So if you say where you live, which municipalities you want to follow, you can click on, I care about the environment, I care about housing, and they'll send you a digest of every piece of legislation that's coming before a local government in Miami that has to do with that topic.
I actually signed up for them, and I think it's the best one because they really just focus on what's important to you, and you're able to chime in. Nowadays,
Yeah.
with the fact that these city hall meetings are being done through Zoom, you're like, okay, I know at this time, this day, I can show up. At the end of the day, it's you have to decide what matters to you because we have limited amount of time in our days, and be an advocate for what's important to you.
And I'm really happy that you're out there, like, talking to people who are a little younger than me. I used to be one of the young people, and now I'm like I think I'm officially aged out of the young voters group.
No, you still look young.
I look young. But my date of birth is from the 80s. So I I'm still young, but you all are, like, younger than I am and have new forms of communication. Like, I'm too old for TikTok. I'm just not going to do it.
Oh, I am too. Don't even go. I don't get it.
I'm all in favor of the kids having their new things, and you all are going to figure out ways to solve problems that generations before us haven't. So it starts with just getting to know the basics. That's all.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I'm gonna include in the description below on if you're watching through YouTube, Leah's Buy Me a Coffee link will be down on the subscription. On the description, and also in the podcast episode in the show notes area, I'll include it there. So if you want to support, I want to let you guys know this is not something that we just, you create a blog post. There's a lot of research. It's time consuming. So although Leah may downplay it, supporting these kind of things really help people keep going and
Definitely.
And move Miami forward. So thank you so much for joining, for your time. I appreciate it. I know you're busy.
Thank you so much for having me. And, thanks to everyone who's listening. And those of you who read my voter guide, left me feedback, sent me emails, followed me on Instagram or Twitter. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to not having to do one for like another 2 years, but I am also excited to take this audience that has developed from this election and learn together about other things.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you so much, Leah.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for tuning in.